Long before the stars trembled, Earth was just another quiet dot in the endless dark, unremarkable, unnoticed, and utterly underestimated. To the vast network of alien civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, humanity was little more than background noise. Their telescopes had watched Earth for centuries, catching glimpses of wars, pollution, and chaos. To them, it all looked like proof that humans were too wild, too emotional, too reckless to ever matter in the grand scheme of things. They saw the nuclear bombs dropped in anger, the forests burning, the oceans choking on plastic, and the constant squabbles between nations. What they didn't see or refused to understand was that every one of those disasters had been survived. Not just survived, but learned from. While other species evolved in peaceful, stable corners of the galaxy, humanity had spent its entire history dancing on the edge of extinction. Ice ages, plagues, asteroid scares, world wars. Each time they clawed their way back, not with grace but with grit. The turning point came quietly. A small, unassuming probe no bigger than a school bus drifted out of the Sol system, carrying nothing but data. It wasn't armed. It didn't broadcast threats. It simply held a record of Earth's journey. Music, art, scientific breakthroughs, but also the raw, unfiltered truth of human suffering and survival. When it crossed into monitored space, a patrol ship from the Velnari hegemony, the enforcers of the Galactic Council, snatched it without warning. Back at their central archive, scholars and officials reviewed the contents with mild curiosity, then dismissed it as the ramblings of a young, unstable species. They laughed at the idea that humans could ever pose a threat. After all, they hadn't even cracked faster-than-light travel yet. Their ships were slow, their weapons primitive, their politics messy. To the Council, order meant control, predictability, harmony. Humanity was none of those things. So they filed Earth under low priority, monitor only, and moved on. But what the Council missed, what they couldn't possibly grasp, was the fire that burned beneath human chaos. They didn't understand that the same species that once fought over scraps of land could, within a single generation, unite to heal a dying planet. They didn't see how the memory of near annihilation had forged something rare in the galaxy, a civilization that prepared for the worst, always. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in bunkers carved into mountains and labs hidden under Antarctic ice, quiet work had been going on for decades, not to build empires but to ensure survival. After the last great climate collapse, after the final border wars ended not with victory but with exhaustion, humanity had made a silent pact with itself. Never again would they be caught unready. They poured their genius not into conquest but into resilience. They built systems that could reboot civilization from scratch. They stored seeds, knowledge, even human DNA in vaults designed to outlast supernovas. And they watched the stars, not with dreams of glory but with caution. They knew they weren't alone. The math was too clear, the universe too vast. So while the world above healed, cities greening, oceans clearing, nations finally learning to share, below, engineers and scientists prepared for the day someone from out there might come knocking. That day arrived sooner than expected. When the Velnari ship appeared in orbit, sleek and silent, broadcasting a message in perfect, translated English, the world held its breath. The message wasn't hostile at first. It spoke of galactic standards and planetary maturity and the need for oversight. Earth was deemed high risk due to its violent history and unstable biosphere. The Council requested full access to all military and energy systems, plus the right to station observers on the planet indefinitely. To the aliens, this was routine. They'd done it to dozens of young species before. Most complied without question, grateful for guidance. But Earth didn't comply. Instead, every nation, yes, every single one, responded with the same calm, unified message. We appreciate your concern, but Earth governs itself. The Velnari were stunned. No species had ever refused a council directive so plainly. Their commanders assumed it was fear-talking or ignorance. They gave Earth 72 hours to reconsider. When the deadline passed with no change, they moved to enforce compliance. That's when everything changed. What the Velnari didn't know was that Earth's military wasn't just tanks and jets anymore. It was a planet-wide nervous system, silent, invisible, and always awake. The moment their warships powered up weapons, hidden sensors deep in the Mariana Trench, the Sahara, and the Siberian tundra lit up like synapses firing. AI networks that had spent years studying alien signal patterns recognized the threat instantly. And Earth struck back, not with a declaration of war, but with precision so cold it felt like nature itself had turned against them. From hidden launch silos disguised as wind farms, rods of tungsten, dubbed rods from God in old military files, shot into orbit at near light speed. They weren't explosives. They didn't need to be. Hitting a ship at that velocity released energy like a small nuke, but without radiation, clean, brutal, efficient. At the same time, swarms of tiny drones, no bigger than insects, detached from orbital debris fields and latched onto the Velnari hulls. Within seconds, they began chewing through shield emitters with nanoacid, guided by algorithms that learned from every failed attempt in real time. The lead Velnari cruiser didn't explode. It just went dark. One moment it was broadcasting warnings. The next it was a dead hulk tumbling toward the atmosphere. 2 escort ships tried to flee. They didn't make it past the moon. Back on Earth there were no cheers, no victory parades. Just a quiet, heavy silence as people watched the news feeds. They knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The Velnari, humiliated and confused, sent an emergency transmission to the Galactic Council. Their report was frantic, almost disbelieving. Primitive species. Overwhelming force. Tactics unlike any recorded. They described weapons that shouldn't exist, coordination that defied logic, and a calmness in Earth's response that felt more terrifying than rage. The Council convened an emergency session. For the first time in centuries, doubt crept into their ancient halls. Could they have been wrong? Was this chaotic, scarred little world hiding something far more dangerous than they imagined? But pride ran deep. To admit error would shake the foundation of their authority. So instead of seeking peace, they chose escalation. If one fleet failed, they would send 10. If 10 failed, they would send 100. The galaxy had never faced a threat it couldn't crush with sheer scale. What they still didn't understand was this: humanity wasn't fighting to win. They were fighting to survive. And there's no force in the universe more relentless than that. As Earth's leaders gathered in underground command centers, reviewing damage reports and preparing for what came next, one phrase echoed through every channel, spoken not with anger, but with weary resolve. They should have studied us better. The stars hadn't shaken yet, but they would soon. After the Velnari ships fell silent, Earth didn't celebrate. There was no gloating, no grand speeches broadcast to the stars. Instead, people went quiet, deeply unnervingly quiet. Everyone knew what that silence meant. The real storm was coming. The Galactic Council wouldn't let a minor species humiliate one of its fleets and walk away untouched. They'd seen how other civilizations were corrected in the past. Entire worlds brought to heel with overwhelming force, their cultures rewritten, their voices silenced. Earth wasn't about to become another footnote in the Council's history books. So while the world above carried on, kids going to school, farmers tending crops, artists painting sunsets beneath the surface, humanity shifted into a different gear. Not panic, not fear, but focus. The kind of focus that only comes after surviving too many disasters to count. Factories that once made solar panels and electric buses now hummed with a new purpose. Universities turned research labs into war rooms. Even retired engineers were called back not with orders but with a simple question: can you help? The Council's ultimatum arrived exactly 1 week later. It wasn't delivered by ship this time. It flooded every communication channel, from radio telescopes to deep space data relays. The message was cold, formal, and absolute. Earth was to stand down. All defense systems were to be powered off. Military command would be handed over to Council observers. Refusal would be met with full pacification. Most species would have folded right there. But Earth had spent centuries learning that surrender often meant extinction. So instead of replying with words, they replied with readiness. Hidden across the planet, systems long thought abandoned flickered to life. In the Pacific, under 3 miles of water, a series of domes opened like mechanical flowers, releasing silent drones that began weaving an invisible net around Earth's orbit. In the deserts of Australia and the frozen plains of Patagonia, massive launch arrays disguised as geothermal plants rose from the ground, their surfaces shimmering with heat-dissipating alloys. And deep in the moon's far side, a facility no alien had ever detected began syncing with Earth's defense grid. This wasn't just about weapons. It was about time. Humanity knew they couldn't match the Council ship for ship. But they didn't need to. What they had was something the galaxy had forgotten, the ability to think like survivors, not rulers. When the Council's enforcement fleet finally arrived, it was unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Hundreds of vessels, each larger than cities, gliding in perfect formation. Their hulls shimmered with energy shields that bent light. Their weapons could crack continents. They moved with the calm confidence of beings who'd never lost a war. They expected Earth to tremble. Instead, Earth waited. The fleet stopped just beyond the moon, broadcasting one final warning. Stand down or be erased. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then from every corner of the planet, a single coordinated pulse shot into space. Not a weapon, but a signal. It carried no threat, no plea, just data. A full, unedited archive of human history. The Holocaust, the atomic bombings, the great famines. But also the moon landings, the eradication of smallpox, the global ceasefire that ended the resource wars. The day every nation agreed to share clean water tech. It was humanity's way of saying, we've been monsters. We've also been healers. We know what we're capable of, both sides. Don't force us to choose the wrong one. The Council fleet ignored it. Orders were orders. The moment their first weapon-charged Earth struck, not with brute force, but with cunning. The drones released from the ocean depths didn't attack the ships. They targeted the space around them. Using precisely timed electromagnetic pulses, they disrupted the fleet's formation, creating blind spots in their sensor nets. At the same time, the launch arrays on Earth fired, not missiles, but clouds of smart chaff, trillions of microscopic mirrors that reflected and scattered enemy targeting beams. Confusion spread through the alien command. Their shields held, but their coordination was breaking down. Before they could regroup, Earth unleashed its real surprise. From hidden platforms in high orbit, kinetic rods, long cylinders of dense metal, began raining down. They carried no explosives. They didn't need any. Accelerated to a fraction of light speed, each one hit with the force of a small asteroid. The first rod struck the command vessel's shield not head-on, but at a calculated angle. The impact didn't break the shield, it overloaded it. Like pouring too much water into a cup, the energy spilled out, frying the ship's own systems from the inside. One by one, the great ships began to falter. Not explode, just go dark, drifting like dead whales in the void. But the most shocking moment came when a human vessel, small, battered, clearly cobbled together from scrap, rose from behind Mars. It wasn't a warship. It was a rescue tug, retrofitted with jury-rigged thrusters and a single railgun. It didn't fire on the fleet. Instead, it latched onto a damaged Velnari escape pod and towed it safely away from the battle zone. The message was clear. We fight to protect, not to destroy. Back on Earth, people watched the feeds in stunned silence. There were no cheers. Just a shared understanding this wasn't victory. It was survival. And the cost would be high. The Council, reeling from the loss, did the one thing they'd never done before. They paused. Their fleet retreated, not in defeat, but in confusion. How could a species with no FTL drives, no energy weapons, no galactic experience dismantle their finest ships with what looked like improvisation? What they didn't realize was that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology, it was adaptability. While other civilizations perfected one way of doing things over millennia, humans had been forced to reinvent themselves every few generations. They failed fast, learned faster, and never stopped trying. In the days that followed, Earth didn't gloat. They reinforced. They patched holes in their orbital net. They shared power between continents to keep the defense grid running. Farmers doubled food production. Teachers added emergency response drills to school curriculums. It wasn't fear that drove them. It was responsibility, not just to themselves, but to every future generation. And deep in command centers, scientists worked on something new, something the Council wouldn't see coming, because Earth knew this battle was just the opening move. The real war, the war for respect for a place among the stars, was just beginning. As night fell over the planet, lights still glowed in homes, hospitals, and labs. Children slept. Parents kept watch. And somewhere in a quiet room filled with star charts and old war manuals, someone whispered what everyone was thinking. They still don't get it. We're not fighting to win. We're fighting so our kids can live in a galaxy that doesn't see us as a threat, but as equals. The stars above remained silent. But Earth? Earth was just getting started. The silence after the second battle didn't last long. This time the galaxy noticed. Word spread faster than light, though not through ships or signals, but through whispers between species that had long lived under the Council's shadow. They'd seen what happened. A primitive world armed with nothing but scrap metal and stubbornness had turned back one of the most advanced fleets in known space. Not once but twice, and they hadn't even tried to conquer anyone. They'd just defended their home. But the Council couldn't afford to look weak. Their entire authority rested on the idea that they were unstoppable. So instead of talking, they doubled down, tripled down. They called in reserves from distant sectors, awakened ancient war motherships buried in asteroid belts, and rallied every loyal system under one banner: restore order. What arrived next wasn't a fleet. It was an armada. 10,000 ships. Not just Velnari, but Cathari dreadnoughts with gravity lances, Zyran carriers that birthed swarms of drone fighters, and the silent, obsidian hulls of the Orlan enforcers, beings who hadn't lost a battle in 3,000 years. They filled the space around Sol like a storm cloud, blotting out the stars. Their message this time wasn't a warning. It was a statement: you will be erased. On Earth, people felt the weight of it. Not panic, there wasn't time for that, but a deep, quiet resolve. Cities didn't empty. Schools stayed open. But in every home, in every workshop, in every lab, hands kept moving, because humanity had learned long ago that waiting for rescue was a luxury they couldn't afford. While the aliens gathered their might, Earth had been busy doing something the galaxy couldn't understand, preparing not just to fight, but to end the fight. Deep beneath the ice of Antarctica, in a chamber shielded by kilometers of rock and magnetic fields, a project older than the United Nations finally powered up. It had no official name, just a code: Ouroboros. The idea had been born during the darkest days of the climate wars, when scientists asked, what if we could control space itself? Not warp it for travel, but bend it as a weapon. The system didn't fire beams or missiles. It used quantum-entangled micro-black holes, tiny stable singularities created in particle accelerators and stored in magnetic bottles. When released in precise sequences, they didn't suck things in. Instead, they unfolded local spacetime, like crumpling a piece of paper and then tearing it. Anything caught in the field didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist in this dimension. Not destroyed, removed. No shield could stop it. No armor could resist it, because it wasn't attacking the ship. It was deleting the space the ship occupied. The first test had been on a dead moon near Jupiter. One pulse, the moon's core vanished. The surface collapsed inward like a deflated balloon. Silent. Clean. Final. Now, with the armada closing in, Earth activated Ouroboros, not as a weapon of rage, but as a last resort. A shield made of physics itself. When the Council's armada launched its assault, it came like a tidal wave. Energy beams lit up the void. Drone swarms blackened the sky. Planetary bombardment platforms locked onto Earth's major cities. They expected resistance. They expected desperation. What they got was silence, and then nothing. The first wave of ships crossed the orbital perimeter and vanished. Not exploded, not disabled. Connoisseur, one moment they were there, the next empty space. Confusion rippled through the fleet. Sensors showed no energy spikes, no debris. It was as if reality itself had blinked, then it happened again. And again. From hidden platforms on the moon, from disguised satellites orbiting Mars, from deep space buoys no one knew existed, Ouroboros pulses fired in perfect sync. Each one carved a hole in space-time, small but absolute. The armada, so proud in its formation, began to unravel. Ships collided with voids they couldn't see. Command links failed as entire squadrons disappeared mid-transmission. On Earth, people watched the feeds with wide eyes. There were no cheers, just a heavy breath held and released. This wasn't glory, it was survival, stripped bare, but humanity didn't stop there. While Ouroboros held the line, something else moved in the dark. Scrap-built human ships cobbled together from asteroid miners, cargo haulers, and old orbital tugs slipped through the chaos. They carried no weapons. Instead, they broadcast something far more dangerous: truth. They sent data streams directly into the Armada's open channels, footage of Earth's children playing in rebuilt cities, of forest regrowing, of hospitals healing wounded alien pilots from the last battle. They showed how Earth had buried its wars, not glorified them. How they'd turned weapons factories into schools. How they'd chosen to heal instead of hate. Some alien crews ignored it. Others hesitated. Among the Cathari, a young navigator muted her commander's orders and played the feed for her squad. On a Zyran carrier, engineers paused mid-repair, staring at images of human hands planting trees where bombs once fell. Doubt, fragile but real, began to spread. The Council tried to shut it down. They jammed signals, executed disloyal units, doubled their fire. But it was too late. The myth of human savagery was cracking, and then Earth did something no one expected. Instead of pushing the advantage, they stopped. Ouroboros went silent. The kinetic rods ceased firing. The drone swarms powered down. A single message broadcast on every frequency echoed through the battlefield. We don't want your war, but we won't surrender our home. Stand down, or we finish this. It wasn't a threat. It was an offer. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council faced a choice they couldn't control with force. And in that moment, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. Back on Earth, light still glowed in windows. A baker kneaded dough before dawn. A student studied astrophysics by lamplight. A grandmother told her grandchild a story about a time when the world almost ended, but didn't. Because that was the secret the galaxy still didn't understand. Humanity's strength wasn't in its weapons. It was in its will to keep building even when everything burned. To keep hoping, even when the sky turned black. And as the Armada hung in the void, torn between orders and conscience, Earth waited, not with guns raised, but with open hands. The fury had been unleashed. Now came the harder part, making sure it was the last time. The Armada didn't retreat, it just froze. 10,000 ships hanging in the silent dark, caught between orders and something they couldn't name. Doubt, maybe, or awe. The Council's command channels crackled with confusion. Some captains demanded to press the attack. Others refused to fire. A few even powered down their weapons entirely. For the first time in living memory, the Council's perfect unity was breaking apart, not from outside force, but from within. Earth didn't push. They held their position, calm and steady, like a parent waiting for a child to make the right choice. They knew that winning a battle wasn't the same as ending a war, and humanity had learned that lesson the hard way, over and over again. Then something unexpected happened. A single ship, a small Cathari scout vessel, broke formation and drifted toward Earth's orbit. It sent no weapons, no threats, just a simple signal. We wish to speak. That moment changed everything. One by one, other ships followed. Not to fight, but to watch, to listen. They saw Earth not as a fortress, but as a home. They saw cities, lit by clean energy, oceans healing from centuries of abuse, forests stretching where deserts once choked the land. They saw people, not soldiers, going about their lives, teaching, building, creating. And they began to understand what the data streams had been trying to tell them all along. This wasn't a species of conquerors. It was a species of survivors who had chosen to become healers. Back on Earth, no one celebrated. There was no parade, no triumphant speech. Instead, engineers opened secure channels. Scientists shared environmental data. Farmers sent seed catalogs. It wasn't diplomacy as the galaxy knew it. No treaties, signed in marble halls, no power plays masked as peace talks. It was something simpler and far more honest. This is who we are. Judge us by what we do, not what you assumed. The Council, meanwhile, was in chaos. Their leaders couldn't believe their own fleets were hesitating. They demanded obedience. But obedience without belief is fragile, and theirs was crumbling fast. Whispers spread through alien ranks. They could have destroyed us, but they didn't. That truth weighed heavier than any weapon. Then Earth did something that stunned even their own people. They invited a delegation, not to a military base, but to a floating research station in the Pacific, built on recycled ocean plastic. The station had labs, gardens, and classrooms. It was powered by waves and sunlight. When the alien envoys arrived, nervous, armored, unsure, they were met not by generals but by teachers, doctors, and engineers. No guards, no hidden weapons, just open doors and honest eyes. One of the envoys, a tall, silver-scaled diplomat from the Zyran conquered, later admitted they expected traps. Instead, they found children showing them how to grow food in salt water. They watched human medics treat a wounded drone pilot from the last battle, not as a prisoner but as a guest. They sat in a circle and listened as an old woman spoke about losing her home to rising seas, and then helping rebuild 3 others. It wasn't propaganda, it was just life, and that was what made it so powerful. Word of the station spread. More ships requested permission to observe. Earth said yes, to all of them. No conditions, no tricks. Just, come, see for yourself. And as they watched, something shifted in the galaxy's heart. The Council tried to spin it. They called Earth manipulative, dangerous, hiding their true nature behind kindness. But their words rang hollow. Because now, thousands of alien eyes had seen the truth with their own sensors, their own minds. Then came the final blow, not from a weapon, but from an idea. Earth broadcast a new message, not just to the fleet, but to every inhabited world in known space. It was short, just 3 minutes long. It showed time-lapse footage, a bombed city turning into a park, a polluted river running clear again, a barren field blooming with crops. Then it showed human hands, old and young, scarred and smooth, planting trees, holding sick neighbors, teaching alien children how to write their names in Earth's many languages. The message ended with simple words on a black screen. We've made every mistake you can imagine. Now we're trying to do better. Maybe you can too. That message went viral across the galaxy. On worlds that had never questioned the Council's rule, people began to ask, why do we obey? What if there's another way? The Council's authority didn't collapse overnight, but its foundation cracked. Species that had stayed silent for generations started speaking up. Minor rebellions flared, not with violence, but with demands for fairness, for a voice. And at the center of it all stood Earth, not leading, not commanding, just being. A living example that strength didn't have to mean cruelty. That power could be used to lift others, not crush them. Back home, life went on. Factories shifted from making defense parts to building clean water purifiers for off-world colonies. Universities opened exchange programs with curious alien scholars. Artists collaborated across species, blending music and color in ways no one had imagined. There were still tensions. Old fears didn't vanish in a day. But something new was growing. Something fragile but real. Trust. And Earth, the planet once dismissed as chaotic and doomed, became something else entirely, a beacon. Not because they shouted the loudest, but because they listened the hardest. Not because they won every fight, but because they refused to stop trying to build something worth protecting. The stars hadn't stopped watching, but now they watched with something new in their gaze. Not fear, not pity, but respect. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the galaxy, a young alien child looked up at the night sky, pointed to a pale blue dot, and asked, "Is that where the humans live?" And their elder, for the first time, answered not with warning but with wonder, "Yes, and they're teaching us how to be better." The old Galactic Council didn't fall with a bang. It faded like a sunset, quietly, naturally, and with a kind of dignity it hadn't earned but was finally learning. In its place rose something new, something messy and imperfect, just like humanity itself. They called it the Pact of Ashes and Stars. Not because it was born in fire, though it had been, but because it honored both what was lost and what could still be built. Earth didn't take the lead. They refused the throne when it was offered. "We're not here to rule," they said. "We're here to remind everyone that no one should have to." Instead, they helped design a system where every voice mattered, big or small, ancient or young, powerful or barely surviving. Voting wasn't based on fleet size or tech level, but on one simple rule. If you could feel pain and dream of peace, you had a seat at the table. At first, it was chaotic. Meetings lasted for days. Arguments flared over language barriers, cultural misunderstandings, even how to define fair. But slowly, something beautiful began to grow. Species that had never spoken to each other shared stories. Engineers from icy moons traded ideas with desert dwellers. Farmers taught city-born diplomats how to plant seeds. And through it all, Earth stayed steady, not as saviors, but as neighbors. One of the first joint projects was rebuilding the Velnari homeworld. Scarred by centuries of rigid control and forgotten compassion, humans didn't bring weapons or orders. They brought water purifiers, solar grids, and something far more valuable: time. They worked side by side with former enemies, not to fix them, but to walk with them. And in doing so, they showed the galaxy that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing a different future. Meanwhile, back on Earth, life continued in its quiet, stubborn way. Kids played in parks built over old missile silos. Grandparents told stories of the Great Silence, the days when the sky went dark and the world held its breath. Schools taught not just math and science, but empathy, history, and the cost of pride. Because humanity knew better than anyone, peace wasn't the absence of war. It was the daily choice to listen, to share, to care. The stars, once cold and distant, now felt closer. Not because humans had conquered them, but because they'd reached out with open hands instead of clenched fists. Joint colonies sprouted on Mars, Titan, and even a once-dead moon near Alpha Centauri. Places where human children grew up speaking 3 languages and playing games with alien friends whose skin shimmered like water. There were still challenges. Of course, old habits died hard. Some species still hoarded resources. Others clung to old grudges. But now, when tensions rose, they didn't reach for weapons first. They called a council. They sent mediators. Sometimes they just sent a message. Remember Earth. Those 2 words had become shorthand for a whole new way of thinking, resilient, humble, and fiercely protective of life in all its forms. One evening, as the sun set over the Atlantic, a small group gathered at the edge of the ocean, not for ceremony but for reflection. They stood where the first radio signals had once blasted into space, full of noise and fear. Now the same spot broadcast something different, a live feed of Earth's heartbeat, the rustle of leaves, the crash of waves, the laughter of children in a nearby village. It played on a loop, beamed gently into the void, not as a warning but as an invitation. Alien ships passing through the system often paused to listen. Some stayed for hours. A few even landed, just to feel real soil under their feet, to taste rain, to see what it was like to live on a world that had stared into the abyss and chosen to plant a garden instead. The galaxy began to change, not overnight but steadily, like tides reshaping a shore. Wars didn't vanish, but they became rarer. Trade shifted from exploitation to partnership. Knowledge flowed freely, not as a weapon, but as a gift. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth, once ignored, now embraced. Strength isn't measured by how much you can destroy, but by how much you're willing to protect. Earth never asked for thanks. They didn't want monuments or titles. What they wanted, what they'd always wanted, was a chance to live, to grow, to make mistakes and learn from them without being erased for it. And in helping others find that same chance, they found something even greater: belonging. Years later, when the first joint human-alien ship launched toward the galactic core, not to conquer, but to explore, to learn, to connect, crowds gathered not just on Earth, but on 100 worlds to watch it go. There were no flags, no anthems, just a shared silence filled with hope. As the ship disappeared into the starlight, someone on Earth whispered what everyone was feeling. We made it. Not by being the strongest, but by refusing to stop caring. And out there among the swirling arms of the Milky Way, the stars no longer shone with indifference. They pulsed with memory, the memory of a small, scarred world that turned its pain into purpose, its fury into wisdom, and its loneliness into a home for all who sought peace. The universe had learned a hard lesson, but a vital one. Never underestimate a species that treats survival not as a right but as a responsibility. And never ever mistake kindness for weakness, because Earth's fury had shaken the stars, not to break them but to wake them up. And in that awakening, a new era began. Not perfect, not finished, but finally truly alive.